Welcome into this edition of the 14. I'm your host, Chris Lee. Today, my co-host, Blake Lovell, will be driving the show. In this episode, he is going to be doing an interview with Rocco Miller from bracketeer.org. Rocco is one of the top-rated bracketologists on Bracket Matrix. Rocco and Blake will discuss many SEC basketball-related topics as they relate to the NCAA Tournament and seeding. In that, they will talk specifically about Alabama's path to a number one seed, what Missouri, Tennessee, and Arkansas need to do to earn protected seeds, where things are with Florida and LSU, and whether Ole Miss can get back on the bubble. So I think you will enjoy that. As for baseball fans, we will be coming with our next baseball podcast probably on Wednesday. Barry Allen and I are working out a time to discuss that and get you caught up on baseball. So anyway, today will be a basketball-themed show, but I promise baseball coming soon. In any case, please enjoy this edition of the podcast today with Blake and Rocco.
All right, let's welcome in Rocco Miller, who is one of my favorites out there in the world of bracketology. And Rocco has his site over at bracketeer.org. You can check up his big board on there, everything he has going on, one of the best in the business. Rocco, great to talk to you as always. You and I did this on a different podcast last year, and we had all these big plans about meeting up in Atlanta to see each other at the Final Four and all this. And what do you know? We actually don't get a tournament, but hopefully we actually get a tournament this season.
Oh, Blake, I just got sad all over again, just reminiscing on that moment. Yeah, it really was like one of the final shows before, everything fell like a house of cards across college basketball. But here we are again. We're going to give it another go, and let's hope for the best in this tournament. It's been great just to get some games in and get somewhat of a season, and I really appreciate you having me on, and congratulations on the new website. It looks great.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that. Chris Lee and I, and of course Barry Allen, who does our baseball stuff, we're having a lot of fun with it. And I know the people who are tuning in for this episode, they want to hear about SEC bracketology in basketball because it's been an interesting season. As we know in the SEC, I think there have been a lot of opinions about the conference, and I think you're going to have those different opinions when Kentucky is struggling as they have. Some people not sure what to do with that and wonder, is the SEC down? Is Kentucky's bad, so the rest of SEC is bad? But we know that's not the case because right now we're looking at a team in Alabama who's sitting here with a chance to potentially wrap up the SEC title this week, depending on how things unfold with their games. And just for full reference, you and I are recording this on Monday evening, which we're not exactly sure yet if we're going to put this up on Tuesday or Wednesday. So some of these games on Tuesday may have already been played. Just want to put that out there right off the bat, just in case. But we're going to kind of talk about things in more of a general overview. But let's start with Alabama because, that's a team that has just completely ran through the SEC to this point, has just been fantastic in what they've been able to do. As you look here at Alabama, and I know, this is one that's probably pretty easy to figure out based on what they've done at this point, but you have Alabama right now as the second number 2 seed based on us talking here on Monday evening. The path ahead for Alabama for a number 1 seed, what does that look like? Let's say, let's look at 2 different scenarios here. Obviously, we can play the doomsday scenario, which we laugh about when we do it on the podcast. But, if Alabama loses out, that's one thing. But let's say Alabama, wraps up the SEC title here, maybe potentially even wins that big game at Arkansas on Wednesday. What do you feel like is the best possible scenario for Alabama maybe to get a number 1 seed? And I know we're playing a lot more hypotheticals here than usual because we don't know what the SEC tournament's going to look like, anything like that. But what have you thought of Alabama, and kind of what do you look like, or what do you feel like that they're going to look like as their road ahead here?
Yeah, great question. Well, Alabama, just a tremendous story. I was really high on them in the preseason, not this high. I think I had them in the 10 to 15 range, but higher compared to most analysts. And I'm just a huge believer in Nate Oates. I'm sure a lot of Bama Nation out there is as well at this point. And I actually got to cover them when he was coaching Buffalo and that great run they made a couple of years back, and just really impressed with the overall schematics of their offensive scheme. and they play at such a fast pace, but they stay really organized defensively. You'll notice if you track, like KenPom type of metrics, they have the number one adjusted defense, despite, in a lot of games allowing a lot of points. They just, that points per possession at the pace they play, it's incredibly effective. And, overall, just looking at Alabama's resume, it's a very packed resume. There's 18 wins there for Alabama, but only one of them falls in Q4. So that means really 17 of the 18 wins have value of varying degrees. 5 of those 17 are against teams that are projected in the field. So that's an important metric when you're comparing teams and you're really trying to stack rank the top 10 or so. And I do think Alabama clearly has a stronger resume than the teams right below them, which would be Villanova, Iowa, West Virginia, and Oklahoma. So there's nowhere to go but a little bit higher up if they keep winning. So if Alabama were to keep winning, obviously get that big win at Arkansas and finish up with some wins over Mississippi State and Auburn, the one line certainly attainable. I think it's almost going to happen if they can win not only those 3, but win all the way out and get the SEC championship in the tournament. That's what we call in the business winning the double, where you get the regular season and the tournament championship. So if you get the double and you're in a power league and you have a strong resume like Alabama's, it is very hard to find an example of that in any year where you wouldn't be a number 1 seed. So the good news as well on top of all of that is the 3 teams right above them are all Big Ten teams. Michigan, obviously looking very strong after the win yesterday over Ohio State. Ohio State being still in that 4th position, and Illinois right below them at 5. And before the committee reveal a couple of weeks ago, I actually had Alabama just slightly above Illinois. I do agree with the committee now that Illinois, just by narrowest of margin, belongs on that 5th spot. But those 3 teams are all going to be playing each other again, and sometimes for the first time, like Illinois and Michigan still haven't played, so something will happen there. And just some of the cannibalism within the Big Ten, even just with those 3 teams, also Iowa in the mix. I believe Alabama would find a way to get into the top 4. I really do. I guess doomsday in that same scenario would be if Michigan just wins out and another team like Illinois gets all the way to the final and does everything else right. It might be hard for Alabama to get past them. But otherwise, I see a clear path beyond that. Now, if you want to talk doomsday at all, I think if they were to free fall, they've already done so much good. They can't really drop significantly further. Maybe a 4 or 5 is like the worst I could see, but something catastrophic I think would need to happen for that to occur with these remaining games here.
Yeah, so just basically on their current trajectory, we're probably looking at Alabama as a 2 seed, maybe a 3 seed at the worst. Let's say if they dropped one of these games, maybe that they shouldn't to a non-NCAA tournament team. The final couple games they have here, maybe they lose to Mississippi State or something like that. But like you said, I think beyond that, they're in a really good spot. And I think you bring up a good point that I was going to ask about, but you completely answered it, knowing that those 3 teams that you have ahead of them are 3 Big Ten teams, and the possibility of those teams playing each other, what that could do to some of them. If one of those teams maybe hits a losing streak, and the other 2 win, or just there's a lot of different scenarios there. So Alabama certainly sitting in a very good spot here, and deservedly so, based on the season that they have had. And I'm going to go ahead and throw in, Rocco, one of the questions we got from Twitter. We got some really good stuff from Twitter, people asking different questions about the SEC. This question, Rocco, is from Al Peterson on Twitter. He asks, can the SEC get more than the 1 protected seed other than Alabama? He says not seeing a real path unless Missouri or Tennessee make a run in the SEC tournament. So I assume, that would be one of them potentially making it to the final, winning the final in the SEC tournament, something like that. Just based on where you have these teams right now, do you see kind of what do you feel like is the best possible scenario in terms of the protected seeds? Because I know right now you have your different tiers. You have Missouri, Tennessee are both in that 3rd tier. You've got Arkansas in that next group, which is the in safely group, along with Florida and LSU, who are a little bit down there. So I guess it would be safe to say that probably the best potential path for the SEC getting, protected seed aside from Alabama would be, if someone like Missouri or Tennessee made a really strong run here and potentially won the SEC tournament title.
I would say so, or at least get to the final. Yeah. So Missouri, Tennessee, as you mentioned, are in best position today. In fact, Tennessee, it's a tough one to place precisely because the committee Definitely like them a lot. During the reveal, they put them at the 11th spot. Now, since then, they've, of course, had a real brutal loss at home to Kentucky, a non-tournament team in terms of at-large hopes. And that did some damage to the Vols, but they've done a lot of good to lead up to this. Their metrics are still pretty strong, and they have manageable games to finish the year with Vandy and Auburn. The manageable games are nice because they should win them, but the problem with that is it's harder to move up the board when you're not getting the big wins. So from a big wins perspective, Mizzou actually has a little bit more opportunity in front of them with a decent Ole Miss team coming in this week in the middle of the week and then finishing up at Florida. Not certain exactly which other makeup games will be added. I'm assuming this is what we're going to go with down the stretch. But if they go down to Florida and get that win, that will do a lot for their resume to just add that extra road win against a team inside the field safely like the Gators. So I think Mizzou's got a chance. And I also think, one thing I really like about Arkansas's resume is that it's what I call a clean resume, meaning there's really been no bad at all. The losses are against teams that are going to be in the bracket to this point. And if Arkansas can maintain that and add in, 2 huge home games this week, if they get them both, that's Alabama coming up Wednesday, LSU coming up Saturday, then all of a sudden you're looking at a team that goes from 2 tournament wins, 2 wins against the board to 14 wins against the board. And the Hogs are sitting really pretty in terms of just having a real clean resume. I'm sure their metrics continue to go up, which are in their favor at this point. And they could actually, they might need a little extra help, but they could get into that top 4, I think, with that scenario. And a strong SEC tournament, of course.
So let's stay on the Arkansas and Missouri because we got 2 questions about those 2 in particular too, and I think they are kind of 2 of the more fascinating ones just based on what they've done this season. Let's talk about this team here in terms of looking at Arkansas because they're on this very hot streak, as you said. You kind of look at where they are right now, the clean resume. That's kind of one of the things that I've kept looking at is when people ask me about Arkansas, it's like, well, the good thing for Arkansas for a while there was that, they have no bad losses. And, it took them a while to get the good wins, but now that they're starting to pick up some of those, it certainly helped them. Joshua Rugger asks, what's the ceiling for Arkansas, you think, seed-wise? And then what would the floor be? So basically, as we did earlier, what do you feel like for Arkansas at this point is maybe that best range to look at them in terms of their seeding?
I'd say for the Hogs, it's, kind of what I was just alluding to. I think they can get up to that 4 seed line, by taking care of business here the rest of the way and staying hot and making a good enough run in the SEC tournament. I would say in that scenario, it's getting to the semifinals. I think an important thing in general, as we discuss teams today, is the NCAA selection committee over the last handful of years where we actually had a tournament. They usually get all their work mostly done by 24 hours before selection Sunday. When the selection show airs, which is 6 p.m. Eastern time. And unfortunately, what that means is when there's a tournament championship game on a Sunday, those brackets are already built beforehand on contingency basis. So if Arkansas were in the SEC final, for example, and they won it, it might not do much to their seed. We've seen this play out with the American Conference champion in the past. I think we've actually seen it in the SEC one year. So I think it's important to know because I think there is a time limit because the committee has to get all their paperwork submitted. So then they have time to air it, broadcast it. It's an unfortunate thing, but every game that's on Sunday leading up to Selection Sunday pays a lot of bills. So they don't tinker with the TV schedule. So coming back to that, I think just Arkansas winning out, getting to the semifinal would get them probably there, especially you got to figure there's a huge chunk of Big 12 teams up in that range right now. We have 6 total. Baylor's not going anywhere. Even if they lost, they're not going to fall that far. But the other 5 could, which are Oklahoma, West Virginia, Texas Tech, Texas, and Kansas now. And if a couple of those teams start to slip, lose 2-3 in a row and go out early in the Big 12, that opens the door for, a Missouri or an Arkansas to get into the protected seed range. Now, if you look at Arkansas's floor, losing these 2 games at home, albeit they're against tournament teams, losing at home is never a good idea. Another thing to keep in mind is right now, one of the things that's standing out for Arkansas is their record against the first quadrant is 4-4, which is pretty good in this area compared to the teams, just below them and above them. They're also 8-5 against the top 2 quads. And then it gets even stronger as you go, 11-5 against the top 3. So to maintain that, they start slipping up. Those records in each quadrant obviously start slipping as well. And those comparisons start going in other teams' favors instead of Arkansas. And they can quickly slip back down into that 8-9 range where they were most of the year or most of the last, handful of weeks. So especially if they lost all 3, whenever you ask about a floor, you just got to think, okay, what happens if they lose out? If they lose all 3 of those, the last one's at South Carolina, that obviously wouldn't be good either. If they lost in their first SEC tournament game, you got to imagine that would probably be against a non-tournament team as well. I still think they're probably in safely with only the 3 or 4 games to go. So I would say they'd probably land at about a 10 in that scenario.
Yeah, and that's what I was thinking too. And you mentioned it. We spent a very long time on Monday's episode of our podcast saying we can play all these scenarios, but the problem is we have no idea what the SEC is going to do with some of these makeup games because, you have teams that still have multiple games left. And of course, the extreme example is Texas A&M, who, most of these teams are still needing to play Texas A&M because the Aggies haven't played, in 3 weeks or so now. So I think that's one of the things that's going to alter a lot of this is not knowing who could play. And not only this is if you make up these games, who are you going to make them up against? Like, how are they going to decide which games need to be played and which games don't? I think there's going to be some people happy about some of those games. There's going to be people angry about some of those games because, we know you want to try to beef up your resume this time of year. So I think that's a very interesting point there in terms of trying to kind of project out because we don't know what other games could be added to the schedule. But on the Mizzou front, here's a question from Cody Thomas, because this is one we've talked about a lot this year, more so specifically when Missouri started struggling a bit here recently. Cody asks, based on the committee's top 16 reveal, will the committee put more stock in Missouri's resume or their metrics? Now, Rocco, we have talked about this so much about if you just look at Missouri's, resume straight up and you see all these wins, you can obviously go back to the Illinois one. They've beaten Arkansas, they've beaten Bama, they've beaten Tennessee, but it seems like some of the metrics do not love this team, and maybe that's because, we talk about having no bad losses. Well, Missouri's got some bad losses on their resume, and so I find them really as one of the more fascinating teams here as we head into or get closer to the start of March.
Yeah, that's great that you brought this up. It's a fascinating subject. In fact, I did pretty well on the reveal guessing. This was the main one I missed. I had Missouri 12, and they landed 16. I had Oklahoma 14. They moved Oklahoma up to 12 when they revealed it, and just doing some reverse engineering on that process. I point at 2 things. So I think the first easy answer is, okay, Missouri had the 2 losses outside of the field, which would be, at the time, the Auburn loss and the Mississippi State loss. Since that time, they've now added a Georgia loss as well. So they've got 3 of those. And that actually stands out when you're in this 4 or 5 range. Creighton's got 3 really ugly losses themselves. So that's really easy to compare Missouri and Creighton. But those 2 versus the other teams right around them, like a Kansas or like a Purdue, it's very apples and oranges.
Right.
So then that's when you got to double click and get a little bit further under the hood. And that's when I think the metrics really do start getting brought up in the committee room. I think, any listeners out there that are hearing me for the first time, one thing I really try to focus on is the psychological aspect of this. And also later in March, I'll be participating in my own mock selections committee through our friends at Hoops HD. And that's always a great process because we simulate all the steps that the committee does. And so when you're presenting a team like Mizzou in the room, you're going to want to look at the things you like about them, the things you don't like about them. And I think when you're starting to break ties, then you start getting into these 5 metrics they list. So I'll review it for the audience. That's the BPI, the Sagarin and KenPom are the predictive metrics. Then you have 2 sets of resume metrics, which are the KPI and the strength of record. And so in the KPI, it's no surprise because we love what Missouri's done on paper in terms of the quad 1 wins, the quad 1A wins. But so in the resume metrics, Missouri's killing it. But in the predictives, they're really, really behind the 8 ball. They're 50 in Sagarin, 47 BPI, 44 KenPom right now. And I think when you start measuring that up against even like a Tennessee, you see Tennessee's like 17 in the net, they're top 20, top 25 in most of the other predictives. the committee more and more, it does seem like, especially in these tiebreak scenarios, are starting to just trust those more than, in years past. So it is this balancing act that they're debating in the room. So clearly this committee has already showed us they prefer kind of more of the Tennessee flavor, if you will, versus what Mizzou's actually done on the court. Individually, if I was a committee member, I would probably be more on Mizzou's side, because I do think going to the NCAA tournament's a reward, and you earn what you get, and you earn your seed. So we'll see how it plays out, but I do think that's about how it shakes out, and the reasons why they landed at 16 on that day.
Let's go to Florida and LSU. We haven't talked much about them, but I would argue that,
Sure.
and look, I know based on where they're at, like you could certainly probably argue that these are the two teams that are the hardest to figure out, just based on how they play too. I mean, it's, Florida, I think they're one. I've said it many times. I look at them and it just feels like this Florida team is missing that extra something. And as I pointed out, maybe that is as easy as them needing Keontae Johnson, who was the SEC preseason player of the year. And without him, it's just sort of a different team. But then you look at LSU. I've made this, I almost feel like I'm pleading LSU's case here to be a potential Sweet 16 team, because I look at this team and I watch them play and I'm like, they have like 4 NBA talents on the floor at one time. And I'm just thinking, man, this LSU team can be really good on offense, but they are not good on defense. And so they worry me a bit. And that's why I think that they've kind of been so up and down with those two teams. And so, right now, as you said, I mean, you've got these two guys, or these two teams sitting here, in that in safely group, but they're towards the bottom of that. You've got Florida at 28 on that number list. You've got LSU at 30. What have you kind of made of these two teams? And maybe when you compare, let's say, the resumes of those two in particular, how do you kind of view those two here as we head, as we said, closer to really the stretch run here, the regular season?
I'll start with Florida. So Florida is a team, as you mentioned, they've been through all sorts of emotions, turmoil through the Keontae Johnson situation, and it's been really good to see some bright spots of late in the last month. I thought the win at West Virginia was just a tremendous performance and a gutsy win. It also really stands out in the resume because West Virginia just continues to climb. They just got done sweeping Oklahoma, right? So Oklahoma themselves has a really good resume going. And so, West Virginia has a really good resume going. So the Gator win there is actually helping a lot. So if they can layer in going forward with their remaining schedule, I know they have that big one at the end with Mizzou.
Yep.
They have some tricky ones this week where they go to Auburn and Kentucky. Those are both very losable, as you know, tough SEC road venues and teams that are kind of really tough to predict. But I do think if Florida per se got hot, won these last 3, they have a lot of room they can go up the board because they can anchor off that West Virginia win. Whereas, the Mizzous and the Tennessees don't quite have a win that strong. So I feel pretty good about Florida. I want them to just layer in a few more supporting pieces of evidence, if you will. And if they can, it's going to be a real positive result seed-wise for them. Now, if they continue to, roller coaster, of course, that loss to South Carolina made a lot of people scratch their head. It wasn't a good performance. Then you're going to probably see them land in this 8-9 range. And, that's going to be really tough for them to get to the Sweet 16. Maybe they get out of the first round, but going up against one of these 1 seeds is going to be really difficult to get past, right? So moving on to LSU, as you said, they're peaking at the right time. This Tigers team probably has the player of the year in the SEC, perhaps, certainly the freshman of the year, Cam Thomas. Guy can score at will. He's just a phenomenal ball player. We'll see him in the NBA next year. And probably a few others, like you mentioned. I think the biggest thing for LSU, they play so well in a lot of these home games. But on the road, they still don't have anything away from home against a team that's actually an at-large caliber team. They have the road win at Ole Miss. Unfortunately, Ole Miss lately has dropped off a little bit away from the cut line. So they're probably about the 9th or 10th team away from getting in. And LSU could really benefit from a road win against the field. So Saturday means a ton for their resume at Arkansas. If they can get that win, it changes a lot of things, I think. You also have a situation where they don't have a win in the first 1A group. So for any audience members that are a little new to the team sheet philosophy, back just last year, they decided to split up quadrant 1 and quadrant 2 by A and B, just splitting it right down the middle. So a lot of times when you're doing these team comparisons, or when I'm looking at what they've done in that 1A range or even that 2A range if it's closer to the bubble. And so with LSU just having a goose egg there, it doesn't measure favorably to the teams right above them, even compared to like a BYU, who I think is just right above them right now. So those are some things for LSU to work on resume-wise, but I do think they're peaking at the right time, and I'm intrigued to see how they perform this week.
For Ole Miss, like we said, they lost this game to Mississippi State. They had been on the hot run here, and you felt like they were certainly trending in the right direction. Now they turn around and lose this game. I mean, I know, as we always say, it's tough to predict because when you're a team on the bubble, you're also trying to predict what everyone else is going to do, and that's impossible. But, I mean, for Ole Miss at this point, I look at them, and I just don't see enough of those quality wins. And knowing that they've been swept by Georgia, they lose this game to Mississippi State. Is it probably as easy for Ole Miss at this point to say they really need to win out in the regular season maybe and then probably win at least, I don't even know if it's 2 or 3. I assume that it's probably their best hope of getting in maybe as an at-large at this point.
Yeah, well, the nice thing for Ole Miss is they do have this big opportunity coming up tomorrow night at Mizzou, right? Yep. So if you get that win, even if that knocks Mizzou down to like the 6th line or so, which it probably would, just guesstimating, the Rebels are now, you got to take notice. The bubble teams just don't have a ton of meat on the bone, right? Yeah. So all of a sudden you give Ole Miss a big piece of meat in a road win like that. You start looking at them a little differently. The way it breaks down for Ole Miss today is, they are 2-2 in their quad 1 opportunities, so just not a ton of those. A win tomorrow gets them to 3-2, but they've also struggled in the middle of those Q2, Q3 games, as you mentioned. So still under 500 in the top 2, 6 and 7 is definitely a struggle and a sore spot. And even worse in Q3, 7 and 9, 2 games under 500 in those games. So they really got to work on that. And I think the win at Mizzou would start swinging the pendulum in the right direction, but you got to follow that up with the Vanderbilt win and a tricky Kentucky finale. If they get all 3 of those, though, I think that evens all those columns up. It probably improves their metrics tremendously. Right now, they're sitting at 62 in the net. They're sitting at 72 in a strength of resume ranking. So they really need help on both sides of the equation. And the only way to cure some of those illnesses is to get those big victories. It's as simple as that. So I think that's where Ole Miss is at right now.
Yep. As we always say, the best recipe for success for bubble teams this time of year is simply to win games, because when you start putting it in the hands of everyone else, that is a game you don't want to play. So unfortunately for Ole Miss, they did that by losing that game to Mississippi State, but we will see what happens with the Rebels. Another question here, Rocco, and we'll wrap it up here shortly. I feel like we probably talked a little bit about this, but I guess it's sort of a rapid fire question here. Cody, who asked the one about Mizzou, also asked, which team are you most unsure about in the SEC, and which team has the most to gain from a seed perspective the rest of the season? I guess we could say the most unsure would be Ole Miss, but they're not projected in right now. So maybe it is from that group of Florida, LSU, but also, like we said, also maybe the team that you feel like has the most to gain, maybe from a seed perspective in terms of how far they can move up. I guess that may also be a team like Arkansas potentially.
Yeah, that's exactly what I wrote down. I had Ole Miss and Arkansas as the teams with the most to gain. Obviously, Ole Miss is the team that's still in bubble-ish position to start making moves up the board. Of course, Saturday, as you mentioned, was not a good step in that direction. But I think there's still time and an opportunity tomorrow to do that. With Arkansas, as we mentioned, I think the biggest thing hurting them is they have only 2 wins against the field. So wins coming up this week at home versus Alabama, LSU are paramount to work on that category, which is something that's looked at pretty closely in the room. And then I think another thing for Arkansas, if you look at the top, we'll call it column and a half of, what's called on the team sheet, the 2A category. If you look through the games all the way through 2A and ignore 2B, they only have 4 total wins. And that's fine for getting selected, but it's, if you're trying to advance as a seed, most of the 5s and 4s have a lot more than 4 wins in that category, or at least a couple more. And that's going to help Arkansas if they can win these 2 games this week to go up the board that way. And I think the team that I'm most unsure about, I hinted at this earlier, is this Tennessee team, because I do think Tennessee is certainly a tournament team. I'm just unsure about where they're going to end up being seeded. Obviously, the committee gave them high praise on the reveal. I think that limits their floor a little bit. Usually when you're in the reveal, you make it either right back in the protected seed area or not too much lower, like a 5 or 6. But, there are some things to be concerned about. I think when you look at the Tennessee profile, I think when you break it down by category, there's just 6 and 6, 500 against the top 2 quadrants. If they keep losing, that could get really poor. Like it could be 6 and 8, 6 and 9. So Tennessee, beyond that, we saw what happened on Saturday. They lost by 20 to Kentucky, or in that range. It was a blowout on their own home court. Obviously, that could mean more about Kentucky than it does about Tennessee. That remains to be seen. But I think the Vols have some, on the court issues to fix first. And if they can't, their resume will be a real interesting case study. So I'll call them my unsure team at this point.
All right, Rocco, I'm about to give you the opportunity to become the resident bracketologist of the SEC for everyone outside the state of Kentucky, because I'm going to ask you this question, and I know the answer to it, but I think some people need to hear it now. With Kentucky starting to make their run here, I think a lot of people need to hear that Kentucky's path to an NCAA tournament bid is through an SEC tournament title, and that the committee is not going to put them in if they finish 10 and 15 or something like that.
Yeah, there's no chance. There's just not enough. It's just simple math. There's just not enough games left. They're an 8 and 13 team. If they won all the way to the final, maybe what would that be? 14 and 14 if they lost in the final?
I think that would be right. Yeah.
Yeah. So the math is not in their favor. There's never been a team in the history of the tournament. Now this would be the year they could make an exception, no doubt. But in the history, nobody's been even one game over 500 and been selected. There's only been a couple that have been 2, and right there in the SEC, the Vanderbilt team a few years back, as you know, and Alabama with Colin Sexton. That team got in, but yeah, so it's going to take, Kentucky is going to have to win the entire SEC title. And for that to happen, I truly believe they need to get into the top 4 of the final standings. So they get a bye down to the quarterfinals. And as far as that goes, they actually have a pretty decent chance. They're one game, one game behind Florida for the spot, but 2 in the loss column. So, Kentucky can handle some of their own business going forward, but I think it's paramount that they get up to that bye situation, so they don't have to win 4 games in 4 days.
I just think people needed to hear that, Rocco. You have no idea, I think, what that meant for some people, because everybody's getting a little nervous, I think, with the way Kentucky's playing. Of course, it hasn't helped probably with me saying, look out. Like, this is that sort of time of year where you start looking in like, uh-oh, you got the SEC tournament coming. Kentucky's playing well. Like, you never know with the Wildcats. I will say that. You just never know. But Rocco, this, as always, a fantastic discussion. So much depth in terms of what you do here. And I always say it, man, I could not do what you guys do. And it's just, it's something that I know is so hard to figure out with all these moving parts. But you do it well, my friend. And just let everybody know where they can find all of your stuff. We talked about bracketeer.org and kind of give people some insight into kind of how you update things, when you update it, and all that, so they can be looking for it.
Thank you, Blake. I appreciate the kind words. It's always good to be on your program. Yeah, you can check me out at bracketeer.org. That's our website dedicated where our focus is bracketology. However, we do some other college basketball analysis as well. What I do this time of year is I'll put out a bracket watch article at the start of each week. So look for that tomorrow morning, which will get you through the midweek games. And we break those down by heavyweight games, which is basically the protected seed level type of games that are going to impact those positions for seeding. We also have a handful of bubble games, and we also do conference races. So one thing I focus on a lot as well is all 31 conferences. I'm not just married to the power leagues. I love all the conferences, and it also helps just learn a ton about the sport in general. There's a million things to learn in this sport. So check that out. And then also most weeks we'll do a teams of the week feature, and we're just always evolving. So each year it gets a little bigger, and you can find me on Twitter at Rocco Miller 8. And I guess just one final thought is, there's a lot of places to find bracket projections. And I think everybody knows about Lenardi and Palm and DeCourcy and now even Katz. But if you want to come and learn a little bit more and get a little bit more in depth on the process, I try to reveal and share as many different things that I hear from the committee. We're also working behind the scenes to interview committee members and really have an understanding of what they are doing. So removing my own opinion, anybody I'm associated with's opinion about a team or who they're a fan of, and really just focusing on the data and what we think the committee is actually going to do come Selection Sunday.
Absolutely.
So thank you.
Yeah, no, you guys do such a great job, like you said, and you get the actual insight. You know what they have to do to put this bracket together, and I think that's so invaluable, certainly this time of year. Real quickly, Rocco, I'm going to put you on the spot here. One mid-major team that SEC teams want no part of, and if your answer isn't Belmont, I'm never inviting you back on this show.
All right, fine. I'll say Belmont. I know you love Belmont. They're right there in your backyard, Blake.
Hey, they're good.
Yeah, that team is phenomenal. They shoot the lights out, and Big Moose in the middle, man. That guy. As a fan of mid-major and low-major basketball, I'm just thankful that he never transferred up to a bigger school. Yeah. He's already a junior. We saw what he could do as a freshman when they won in the tournament against Temple. And in that championship game of the Ohio Valley against Murray State. So yes, I love Belmont. If I can bring up another team, I would say absolutely watch out for this Loyola Chicago team. Yep. They have the number one. It was crazy to me. I don't think I've ever seen this from a mid-major team. The number one defense in America and offense in adjusted efficiency. So those numbers are adjusted to the schedule that they've played. And they've got to play a team like Wisconsin and Richmond and a few others in the non-conference, and they've just been lights out. I think they're up to the top 10 or 11 on Ken Palm's ratings, and that's usually pretty indicative of what's coming in the future. I've watched them several times, this Ramblers team, and they play just in-your-face defense. They really make the other opposing offense uncomfortable, and it's just not a team that I would want to face if it was my favorite team playing them. So definitely don't smile if you get them in your bracket.
Yep. Western Kentucky's another one. I think Alabama knows that very well from earlier in the season. They're another team could make things interesting. You talk about a team that has NBA talent. That's one there too. So just throwing out a couple different teams there, because I know SEC fans, as we start to get closer to the bracket, these are the kind of teams that you probably don't want to see in your particular spot. But Rocco, again, thanks for doing this, man. I definitely want to get you back on here, maybe as we get closer to the start of the tournament, because I know things are really going to start heating up. So really appreciate you doing this, and look forward to talking again here soon.
Anytime, Blake. My pleasure. Thank you.